Okay, we are live, but I got to let it breathe just for a moment. Got to plug into our awesome Facebook community. And then we're going to get things rolling on tonight's Frozen Rope podcast. So I'm seeing 3 green check marks. Awesome. Welcome in, everybody. This is the Frozen Rope podcast. I'm your host, Chad Jensen. With me, Patrick Byrnes, the deputy editor of InsideTheJazz.com. Pat, what's good, big dog? We've got a lot to talk about this evening. And first things first, as the Jazz Summer League continues to roll on, of course, the Salt Lake iteration, I guess we could say, in the books. We're in the Vegas section with a couple games now also. But what have been some of your takeaways so far from what you've seen from Jazz Summer League?
My first takeaway is that, it's a good time to be a Jazz fan. If you're complaining about something about the Jazz right now, then you need help. I don't know what to say. I can't help you. There is a ton to be excited about. This feels so much like Donovan Mitchell, back when he emerged on the summer league. And, we kind of went into the season thinking, probably not going to make the playoffs. Now everyone's like, there's no reason why a Jazz fan now can't think that this team can't make the playoffs because of what's going on with Keyonte George and just the domino effect. There's going to be a ton of just the whole vision of, I think, Danny Ainge, what he sees and what he's going to do in the future is going to be going off of what's going on with Keyonte George. So yeah, it's awesome.
Not too many people, maybe some, but not too many Jazz fans, I'll put it this way, Pat, would have perceived that, a few games into Summer League, we'd all be buzzing about Keyonte George and not Taylor Hendricks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, in the case of Hendricks, it's much ado about nothing. Jazz aren't going to risk anything to a top 10 pick that is who is not perfectly healthy. So he'll find his way onto the court when the time is right. But in the meantime, this emergence of Keyonte George, not only is it exciting for Jazz fans to see what's happening there, but the implications are awesome. How it could trickle down. There's a lot of different domino effects that I want to get your thoughts on, Pat. First things first, though, I want to ask you this: as we talk about the domino effect, let's say this momentum sustains. He has a really great Keyonte George, a really great training camp later on. Is there what veteran guards do you think he most threatens his emergence at this stage with where the Jazz are at?
It's a good question, and I don't have a firm answer to that because a lot of this is going to take care of itself in camp. I think it's safe to say that, Jordan Clarkson's spot in the rotation is cemented. And even if he doesn't start, Colin Sexton is going to, be a big part of the Jazz this year. But you got to figure Dunn and Horton Tucker, that George is going to carve into their minutes. I was thinking about it today, and I think that, for Horton Tucker, if he isn't named the starting point guard to start the season, for him to get playing time, he might have to carve a role as maybe the backup 3, because right now they don't really have Fontecchio.
Yeah.
He's kind of the backup 3 right now.
Yeah.
And maybe Horton Tucker can step into that. Maybe Abaji can step into maybe those minutes. But, they're going to have to carve a role out for George. They have to. I mean, it's just you can't leave that talent on the bench. And the Jazz are still at a point where they're developing. So even if George, has mistakes he needs to make, let's just let him make the mistakes. Let's roll him out there. Let's give him 25 to 30 minutes a game. I mean, I think they have to find that.
And fans saw last year how beneficial that can be to just not to do it. When I say throw caution to the wind, I'm not meaning in the sense of being totally reckless, but the benefit of saying, no, let's just get these guys some minutes. How it came out in the wash for Walker Kessler, how it came out on the wash for Ochai. Very exciting. Real quick, Pat, I want to say hello to a few people in the chat jumping in. What's up, Dante? Great to see you on YouTube. Really appreciate you being with us. Big dog. Yes, indeed. Big Utah. I see your question. We're going to grab it 1 second. Also, shout out to Lynn, who says on Facebook, and also we love our Facebook community. Really stoked to see how quickly, Pat, the Facebook page, the Frozen Ropes Facebook page, has grown, approaching 6,000 followers. We love each and every one of you. Appreciate you guys trusting us with your follow on our coverage of the Utah Jazz. Lynn says, Keyonte George, got to run, but we'll catch y'all later. No worries, Lynn. Thanks for popping in. And yes, it's an exciting time for the Jazz. But Pat, obviously you and I have a lot more we want to get to. We'll get to that. But one way of getting there is by answering this question from Dante on YouTube. He says, do we trade Colin Sexton for a pick? Now, as we talk real quick, Pat, I want to set the stage a little bit here. As we talk about the domino effect of this emergence of Keyonte George and some of the vets it might affect, even if it's not a perfect apples to apples comparison in terms of position, like, Keyonte George is not exactly Colin Sexton and so on and so forth. That is a guy who could find himself, minimized, so to speak, or under threat anyway by George's emergence. Could you see, as Dante's asking here, the Jazz perhaps saying, you know what, we've got a smorgasbord of guards on our hands. Sexton, if we can get a pick for him, we're gonna pull that trigger.
That's a good question, and I think the way Danny Ainge is operating and kind of things are just taking place. I think Sexton could get traded at some point, but I think the Jazz are at a point right now where when the opportunity presents itself, they can go all in on an all-star caliber player. That player that they can pair with Markkanen. And if you trade Sexton for a pick right now, that probably gives Sexton maybe a better role somewhere else. But in the best interest of the Jazz, Sexton still has a pretty good contract. And, when they go in, when that all-star becomes available via trade, the Jazz are going to want some ammo to go in and get that guy. And Sexton has $17 million on his contract. If he plays good, at the beginning of the year, they're going to want to give him minutes. If he looks good, he's going to be considered an asset. So the way things are shaping up, and this is an if, I'm not totally 100% sold on George being the point guard, but it looks like it's trending in that direction. If they're ready to give George at a point, they're ready to they're sold, they're all in on George. They're going to want Colin Sexton. They're going to want Kelly Olynyk's expiring contract. They're going to want Taylor Horton Tucker's expiring contract. And then they've got the first round picks, but they're going to want as much ammo as they can to go out and get that guy paired with, Markkanen. And, there's a guy becomes available, you want to be able to put the best offer on the table. So I think if you're going to trade Sexton, that's a big if, because he's still awesome. I hope they don't trade him. I'd rather trade Clarkson, but if they do trade Sexton, I think you got to hold on to him. So you have the best offer available when something becomes available. Because right now there's two teams that can compete with the Jazz as far as the best deal on the table. And it's Oklahoma City and it's New Orleans. And I think that's the reason why that, the Danny Ainge he's been patient, and he's going to continue to be patient until that opportunity comes up. And then you're going to need Sexton to sweeten that pot to close the deal.
And how refreshing is that, by the way, to see a front office executive exercise patience in a way that really pays off big time for the team? Because as we see so often, Pat, across different pro sports landscapes, whether it's NBA, NFL, you name it. Sometimes GMs, sometimes CEOs, execs, they panic, right? They hit they hit the panic button. I mean, Minnesota, I think last year, it would be fair to say, last summer, the Minnesota Timberwolves panicked a little bit in terms of, we have this chance at Gobert. Here, let's go ahead and sell the farm. And although they didn't necessarily, Pat, feel the immediate sting from that, because they did go on to fight their way into the playoffs, it will come out in the wash long term, because, as we know, that ended up being a very, very one-sided trade, the whole Rudy Gobert thing.
Yeah, and just kind of give you an example, because one thing I've learned through this whole process, kind of seeing how Danny Ainge is operating, I'm never criticizing Danny Ainge again. And I'll kind of give you an example. He got criticized last year when he gave up Bogdanovich for Kelly Olynyk, basically. And, Bogdanovich was on an expiring contract, and they traded for a player that wasn't as good for 2 years and that money. But now look at, they're going to need Olynyk with that expiring contract to get that all-star guard. If he would have kept Bogdanovic, they would have one less asset to sweeten that pot to get, that player to pair with marketing. So I don't know if Ainge was thinking that far in advance, if it just worked out that way. But right now, like, expiring contracts are at a premium with, teams looking to get under the luxury tax. People are going to want those expiring contracts, and that having Olynyk might be the difference maker. So all those people that criticized that Bogdanovic deal, including me, we're eating crow right now.
Yeah,
because I'm glad we have Olynyk in that contract on our hand to, like I say, go get that guy, go get that second all-star on the team.
And that's one thing, guys, you're going to find as you continue tuning in to the Frozen Row podcast is myself, Pat, when we're wrong on a take, if we find through, the telescope of time looking back that we were wrong about something, we're always going to come out and fall on that sword, eat that crow, even if we have to put a healthy helping of sriracha on that bad boy. Although for what it's worth, I've had a hard time finding sriracha in the grocery stores the last couple of weeks. So I don't know what I'd use. Maybe I'd have to go to ketchup, Pat. I don't know. But segueing back, Dante, we really appreciate the questions, big dog. We're always happy to grab them. We'll talk more about Talen Horton-Tucker. We're about 12 minutes in, so we're doing pretty good on time. But one of the reasons why we do these podcasts as a live stream is we want you guys, the listener, the viewer live, to be a participant and join the conversation, whether it's questions, your insights, your topics, the things you want to talk about. Pat and I, that's half the reason we're here, is we want to be able to engage with you, keep our finger on the pulse of how the fans really are feeling in Jazz Nation. So do not be afraid of dropping an observation. Doesn't even have to be a question. Sound off in the chat. We want to hear it. Okay. But Pat, let's segue back for a minute here to Keyonte George. And, you've drawn a few parallels, not only today on the podcast, but in a few of your most recent articles. You've drawn parallels between how things are shaking out so far with George and how they shook out with Donovan Mitchell when he was coming out in Summer League. I just wanted you to kind of talk a little bit more about the similarities you see there, and if there are really any conclusions to be drawn there from.
Yeah, I mean, I think the chatter that George is going to be starting day one, I think we should put that to bed. I don't think that the management is going to disrespect, the starters right now. And if you look at the history, and if anyone can, come up with a Jazz rookie that actually started day one, and Donovan Mitchell actually did start day one, but it was because of an injury. He didn't take over the starting job where they announced he's a starter moving forward, I think, until game 12. He started 3 games out of the first 12. But, the parallel I see is like when the season started, everyone kind of knew it was only a matter of time before Donovan Mitchell was going to take Rodney Hood's spot. And it took them 12 games before they did it. And I think, it could be a situation where, everyone knows it's coming. It's just a matter of what's when. Another example would be Walker Kessler last year. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew we kind of knew even when Walker Kessler was coming off the bench, like, this guy should be starting. Olynyk shouldn't be starting. And then it took an Olynyk injury. Walker Kessler took over, and then when Olynyk came back, they just put him to the 4. Yeah. But it's very similar to the Rodney Hood, Donovan Mitchell situation where, if he keeps doing what he's doing, eventually you got to make him the starter. But I don't think it's going to happen day one. If anyone can think of a recent Jazz player, like in the last 10 years, let's say, that had the starting job on lockdown game one, send me a message, because I'd be curious to who it is. But Exum wasn't. Darren Williams wasn't. He was drafted number 3. Donovan Mitchell, like I said, he came off the bench, I think, 10 out of the first 12 games before they announced he was a starter. Who else was there? Cantor didn't start. He was a high pick. Mm-hmm. So there's some, there's just history doesn't bode well for him starting. But, probably what a better question than him not, is he going to start or not? A better question is he going to finish the games? Because just because he doesn't start doesn't mean he's not on the floor when it's, a 2-point game with 3 minutes left. So that will be interesting to see what happens. But, The only thing you gotta look at with George, like what's going to keep him off the court, and this remains to be seen, is defense. Is he gonna score, but giveth on the other end, and that could be a problem. But
Right.
but offensively, I'm not worried about him all. That guy's going to score points.
He appears to be the genuine article, and if you'll forgive the mixed sports metaphor, already out kicking his coverage as a young pro in the league, which is really, really cool to see. All right, let's shift gears a little bit here. We talked about some of the domino effects of George, and of course, answering Dante's question earlier, is it Dante or is it Dante? I want to say it's Dante, as far as how you pronounce it, but he wants to also maybe hear how this might impact THT, who, of course, we were all, if you rewind the tape, Pat, just, a month, everyone's like, all of Jazz Nation is kind of pining on pins and needles on the decision Jordan Clarkson's going to make and THT, because THT showed out so well as that big point guard to end the season. Then he gets his player option. What's he going to do? It's hard to imagine how, losing that kind of an impact. And then he comes back, and now, Pat, with the emergence of Keyonte, he's kind of, at least in the Jazz zeitgeist, in the collective state of mind, he's not as front of brain. So where does THT now fit into this whole milieu?
So I'm hoping, because I'm a big THT guy, and I'm a big, like, he's young. He's a guy that can develop. He hasn't hit his ceiling. He's got all-star potential, but he's not a catch and shoot guy. He's a guy that needs the ball in his hands to be effective. And if he's not running the point and he's not effective, like in that catch and shoot role, it's going to be tough, if they don't anoint him the point guard. So I love THT. With what's going on, there might be some minutes for him to get, at the small forward position. He can play multiple positions. Not like he's pinned as a point guard, but he can maybe get some minutes there. They still might make him the starter. He still could be the starter, and George could come off the bench to begin with. But it's going to be, there's going to be battles in camp, and it's going to be decided in camp, and it's going to be decided in scrimmages that we're not going to have access to. So however it plays out, I trust that based on the decisions they made so far, I trust that whatever they do is the right decision to make.
It certainly is a good problem to have, however it shakes out. The situation the Jazz find themselves in right now is one that a lot of NBA teams would be envying right this moment. James, yo, my dog, thank you for being with us in the chat. We appreciate you watching live. And then also, dropping an interesting question. Again, we want you guys sounding off in the chat. We want to hear your thoughts, your takes, your questions. So appreciate you joining the conversation, my friend. He says, Pat, if you could swap George right now for Anthony Black or one of the Thompson twins, would you do it, Byrnes?
Oh, that is a hard question. That is such a hard question. Oh, man. For a Thompson twin, probably, yeah, I would. Anthony Black, I don't know. Anthony Black has shooting issues. He's bigger than George. He's, going to be a better defender. That's just such a hard question. It's like playing pin the tail on the donkey. Like, what do you want me to say? Like, I'm just going to roll with George. But yeah, I'd take a Thompson twin over George right now. I mean, you have to. I think you got to do that. I don't know. Anthony Black, maybe a coin toss. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
All of a sudden, it's like an issue. It's like a question where before the draft, most people wouldn't have plausibly thrown this out. But James, this is a very plausible question now that actually makes it very hard to answer. I would probably roll the dice. As weird as it might sound, like Jazz colored glasses on right now, but I'd be inclined to hedge on one in the hand, Pat, instead of the two in the bush. And roll with George, because it's what the devil so to speak. And I don't want to make it sound like in any way a negative connotation on George, but what he's shown so far, man, it's very exciting. And that's not to say that Black hasn't shown out, but I probably agree with you that push comes to shove, probably err on the upside of one of those Thompson twins if you could just snap your fingers and make it so. But I'm definitely not hating the situation the Jazz find themselves in right now, though, Pat, with George. And we still haven't even seen what kind of impact Hendricks can make. I mean, Bryce Sensabaugh, we'll see what happens there. But like, this is the Jazz are in a very fortuitous situation right now with their young talent.
Yeah, the one issue I do see with George, I mean, that's not so much George, but the Jazz, like a decision they have to make. Like, I have a hard time having George and Clarkson on the floor together at the same time, or George and Sexton on the floor at the same time, just because defensively, they're going to give up some points, and it's almost like, I think, man, like once George starts, I think you got to almost put Clarkson to the bench, have him coming off the bench. And it's almost like with the guard defensive deficiencies we have, it's almost like you have to have either THT, Chris Dunn, or Abaji on the floor. One of those guys has to be on the floor at all times, or the other team is just going to feast offensively. So that's an issue that will work itself out. And I'm just really curious, if anything, how they're going to distribute the minutes and who's going to play with who. But I was thinking about that. If George starts, if Clarkson starts too,
right,
boy, we're going to give up some points.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons why Chris Dunn probably isn't sweating too much what's happened so far with the Jazz's offseason moves, just because he does bring that unique, on top of his ability to run half court sets and just that experience he's gained in the league. What he brings to the table as a defender is not to be trifled with. So that's a value that he should feel pretty confident in right now. Pat, we're at about 22 minutes. We got a little bit more time. So let's grab this question that Dante's jumping back in with. Whoever our point guard is, or topic, I should say, Ochai has to be the shooting guard. So this is interesting, Pat, because you and one of our senior writers, James Lewis, who we will be involving in the podcast very, very soon. He's very, very knowledgeable, great insights. Shout out to James. But both of you have been incessant in your opinion that even seeing how Jordan Clarkson emerged into like a borderline all-star last year, right? Like caliber player. He still would have been best. The Jazz would have still been best served with him coming off the bench as a sixth man. So maybe that's, as Dante's saying here, maybe that's what the ultimate destiny holds here for Clarkson. He comes back to be going back to the bench because Ochai's at the 2, and maybe it's ends up being THT at the 1. Maybe it ends up being at some point this season George. But talk about why you feel like Jordan should be coming off the bench, and of course your thoughts on what Dante's saying here with Ochai.
Yeah, I wish James was here to answer this question, because he would love this question. Because James is a guy that he kind of shed some light on me on this question when we were talking about it, and he played some professional basketball overseas, and it kind of came up, and he said he would much rather be on the floor with Ochai than Clarkson. And the reason why is because with Ochai, where he's going to be, where he's going to be at. He's a great catch and shoot. He doesn't disrupt the flow of the offense. So I completely agree with Dante. I guess I wish James was here to answer this question. He could go on all day about it, but yeah, I mean, Jordan Clarkson has a skill set where he can just score, just get out of the way, and he can score. And that's what you need when, you bring your bench in and your good scorers are off the floor. And, there's a reason why Clarkson has been the sixth man his whole career. It's not like we're just like making this up. Like coaches that have coached him before have always put him in that role. Yeah. And he's worth his weight in gold. Like those type of players that can keep the ball going through the hoop when Markkanen's on the bench. And, those guys are like crucial to a team. Without those guys, like you can't win. And yeah, I mean, and then you got the fact that Ochai has, a better, his upside as far as a defensive player is a lot better.
Yeah.
So if you got like, a guy like George running the point, and I just kind of brought this up a little bit earlier, you want Ochai on the floor too. You don't want Clarkson on the floor with George. You want Clarkson on the floor when the subs are in. So I would love for ultimately Clarkson to go back to the role that he had when Donovan Mitchell was here, where he was sixth man of the year, because he's like a top 5, 6 man in the league.
Yeah.
So yeah, I 100% agree that Ochai, with the 2 guard, if you really take a step back and see what the Jazz need as far as defensively, a catch and shoot guy, a guy that's not going to disrupt the flow of the offense, Ochai should be the starter, but I don't think he will. Like the Jazz, they love Clarkson, they love him. I love him too. It's not that I don't like him. I just like him in another role.
If I read James writing this once last fall, I probably read it 15 times. And he didn't, what I'm about to say was not James taking anything away from JC, because JC, right out of the gates when Will Hardy arrived, he quickly, and of course, Danny Ainge, Delta Way, Donovan, Delta Way, Gobert, he quickly zeroed in on JC as he's going to be the guy initially that's going to, the key to this offense. He's going to be a starter. He's not coming off the bench anymore. He's going to be in the game when the chips are down. And then, of course, Markkanen, another credit to James, by the way, he said when the Jazz acquired Markkanen, all right, he said this dude's going to be the most improved player this year. Watch. And boom, he hadn't even stepped on the court yet, Pat, as a player, for a Jazz player, and he called that. But what I was going to say, though, about if I read it once, I read it 10 or 15 times from James, is that JC over dribbles. and that he just throws the offense out of sync in that sense. And even though he can score at will and he's a great creator and all that, it can throw things slightly out of whack. Real quick, guys, we're about out of time. Dante again saying, I low-key think we don't make the KG pick if we knew JC would have opted in. So in other words, the George pick probably wouldn't have been made. What do you think, though?
I don't know, because I think based on what I read, he was pretty high on the Jazz's board. I think he was like 11 or 12 on their board. So I think they're going with George. You can't have to, as far as shooters go, and even when Danny Ainge said at the end of the year press conference, when they asked, what are you looking for? We're looking for people that can shoot the ball. And George hits that tee. So I don't think it made a difference. But yeah, I wish James always compares Jordan Clarkson to Curly Neal of the Globetrotters.
Yeah.
Curly Neal.
We're kind of dating ourselves right now, though, with the whole Globetrotters thing. But guys, we are out of time. This has been a really fun conversation. Those of you who have joined us live, really appreciate you. Those of you like James and Dante and Lynn who jumped in the chat with your insights and some of your questions, really appreciate each and every one of you being with us. And for those of you who will be listening and watching after the fact on demand, we really appreciate you being with us. Before we say goodbye, though, I want to make sure you know how to connect with us outside of these podcast streams on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Make sure you're following my partner here, Patrick Byrnes, on Twitter at PByrnesNBA. That's Byrnes spelled Byrnes, at PByrnesNBA. You can connect with me at Chad and Jensen. And then also make sure you're following, like if you're a YouTube guy and you didn't know that we had the Facebook page, go follow The Frozen Rope on Facebook. If you're a Facebook guy, didn't know we had the YouTube page, go become a sub on YouTube. And the same goes for Twitter. Really help us reach like-minded Jazz fans just like you guys. Share it, like it. Best thing you can do for us right now, aside from really joining the conversation and sounding off when we're live, is make sure you like the video, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. And the biggest compliment you can pay myself and Pat is sharing this on your own social media, showing it to your friends, telling your people about us, and helping us grow this thing, because we're on the precipice, Pat, of what could be a very exciting season for Jazz fans. And we're really looking forward to grinding through it every single day with these streams. Right now, we're doing the live stream podcast as a once a week thing. But when we get to the season, that output is definitely going to rise. And we are looking forward to having you guys with us. So, Pat, great conversation, Big Dog. Can't wait to see you again tomorrow, or next week, I should say, Tuesday, 5 p.m. Mountain Time.
Yeah, it has been fun. And yeah, well, I'm sure we'll have a ton of stuff to talk about next week. So yeah, it's been a fun summer.
All right, guys. For Pat Byrnes, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll see you next Tuesday, 5 p.m. Mountain Time. We'll talk to you then.